So what I like to do is think about product market fit in three main chunks. So first here is the minimum viable product or the product, and really all the elements that go into how to develop the best product you can. And then the rightmost chunk is the audience. The minimum viable audience is something we're going to dive into in this presentation, and it's a key way of thinking about your audience that I'd like to introduce to you. And then in the middle, gluing your product to the market and the audience is positioning. And positioning is really where you're applying the lens and thought process on all the different qualities of your product and how you're going to bring that product to market, and the nuances on how you message it, how you package it, and how you do that efficiently. And so we'll dive into each of these areas and talk about some of the techniques and controlling the process on iterating on each of these areas, and sort of allow you to have a little bit more tools in your toolbox for reading the symptoms of your company. So first, let's dive into minimum viable products. And so when you're at a startup, you know, oftentimes you see some of these diagrams that we're going to talk through, these different options here. And people talk about, you need to really just focus on your MVP and do it in a phased approach. And so here's a couple phased approaches. Let's talk through the maybe incorrect ways to think about this, or at least what I think is incorrect ways. And so the first path here is, you know, you're seeing a tire built, and then maybe the frame of the car, and then the chassis of the car, and then you piece it all together into a car. And so that's not bad if you're Tesla or have a big amount of funding to eventually get to that car and you know exactly what the car is. But this is a very waterfall approach to building the elements of the car and then assembling them all and delivering the car at step 4. The only challenge is you don't have any products to sell at steps 1, 2, 3 until you get to 4. And so a more iterative approach is desired when you're developing MVPs and have sort of, you know, restricted budgets and time that all of us in the startup world have. And so you might think option number 2 is a better option for you. And so in this approach, you see that it is more iterative, right? First, we have a scooter, then a bicycle, then a motorcycle, then a car. You would think, wow, this is a really iterative way to get to a full-up car, and each one is a little bit more complex. The only challenge is this path does not factor in the audience in which you're selling to, right? The scooter is maybe sold to kids or teenagers, younger folks. The bicycles may be sold to athletes, a motorcycle to adventurers, and to cars to families. And so here you're seeing that you're navigating through and iterating not only on the product, but you're iterating on the target audience as well. This is going to create more and more churn on both sides of that spectrum, right? You're working on your product and you're working on your audience and changing both things at the same time. If you were to be able to lock down that audience into the same audience on this path, then you could achieve a much more efficient path. And so this is what the third row here is really showing. So first step you see here is a really slow and maybe inefficient car. The second step is a little better. The third step has a full-up chassis and maybe ready for a full family. And the fourth step, you're at a supercar. And so here is an iterative approach toward developing that supercar where I'm getting the basic parts each step of the way, and I'm focused on the same target audience again at each step of the way, families or sort of everyday citizens, right? So you know, when you review these 3 different steps, you got to always factor in, how am I going to iterate on my product in the most usable way for the same target audience every step of the way. And this gets much harder when you talk SaaS, right? Like what minimum feature can I supply my audience that is still useful at the end of the day? And that's really the thought process you always want to stay focused on, and really ruthlessly prioritize the features in your backlog so that you're always delivering something the minimum set of value. And so that's a term that we've often used in my career at Dyn and Oracle, is ruthless prioritization. And it's really asking the question, are you sure you need that right away many, many times, and really baking down that feature set to the minimum viable. And so that's a common theme you'll see come up quite a bit, but that's a good approach to iterating on MVP. So let's continue on. So next step all the way to the right of that chart at the beginning was the minimum viable audience as well. And so let's talk a little bit about designing that audience. So oftentimes when you talk with startups and founders of startups have big visions, right? We're always going to sell that multi-billion-dollar market on our solution and how our solution is more differentiated than anything else out there in the market, and it's really going to be game changer. That is fantastic. You always want to have big vision. But when it comes down to early days in your startup, you want to get as focused as possible in that minimum viable audience development. And so you don't want to go after, you want to have that vision when you're creating the market and that vision, but you want to really focus it down when it gets to iteration. So what does this look like? This might be thinking about things like exact focus messaging, right? On those early features that you want. If it's that car, it maybe say, I have an efficient car that's gas efficient, or it's an electric car, really great for the environment. And it's also focusing down on how you're going to actually talk to those audience, that target audience. I like to think of when I'm at a startup, what are the potential customers that I can actually reach? Not this big sort of flexible and dynamic market opportunity, but where are the customers? Where are their wells, where they're going after work? What are the magazines they're reading? What are the websites they go to? How am I going to focus and get to these exact set of customers? The more and more focused you can get, the less features you need to suffice that customer, right? Now we're able to really get down to the exact 10, 100, 1,000 customers that I'm trying to target and really get focused on what they need, not what the full market needs. That type of focus is going to help you get more efficient on your minimum viable product development as well. And then there's less variables, right? So the fact that you focus down that target audience, now when I put maybe a package or a price in front of them or some messaging in front of them about what my product solves, the feedback I'm going to get from those potential customers is going to be much more focused, because all of those 100 or 1,000 customers are all more similar than the full up market opportunity. So the more and more focused you can get on your target audience development, the more and more feedback and the less scope you're going to be iterating on. It's going to really help make your startup more efficient. And this is a little quote from Greg Eisenberg around minimum viable audience development, right? And here he's just stressing minimum viable audience is equally as important as a minimum viable product. And so I totally agree. It's a lot of times we focus on product development and feature development, but if you're able to more and more iterate and get more and more focused and niche and craft that messaging specifically for your minimum viable audience, the better and more efficient your startup's going to be. So put just as much effort into how you sell and instead of just what you sell and the features you're developing in your product as well.